I'm Dean Walker, and I'm the founder of a little organization called Living Resilience, and the library of different kinds of support and resources available to the folks who are attracted to this kind of work called Deep Academy. And this kind of work turns out to be the providing of transformative support and resources for people who are bravely facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. It's not exactly the the most success-oriented business model or business purpose that one might come up with, but that's pretty reflective of my business career in general. I've really been in 30 years plus of corporate and personal development training, and all of that training being involved with transformation-based training. And what transformation-based training means that a given corporate group or individual or couple who are interested in having certain aspects of their life or their business or their organization be transformed, and consciously so, and inviting that to be as positive an experience of transformation as possible. Transformation itself is meant to be a discontinuous jump. In this case, if we're leaning ourselves as far as we can toward a positive jump in, if it's an organization or a business, it's in productivity of some kind, obviously. And with couples, it would be in with regard to intimacy, with youth at risk programs, which is been a big part of those 30 years of transformation-based programs. It's to work with adults in a community and train them to work in a way that is extraordinary with troubled youth in their community. And they themselves, more than likely, would be experiencing some discontinuous positive jump in important values or aspects of their life in that community or in their own families, in addition to the benefits that occur for those young people in the program as well. And I was about 20 years co-leading with a team of folks here in the USA and also in the UK for about 12 of those years. So there have been a few other things that I should mention that I've been piecing together in these past 10 years or so of being very involved with serving the collapse aware community. I'll be talking more about what does that mean, collapse aware, but maybe I should just start with let you know what you're looking at is an introduction to this work. And it was requested of me to put this together, and it'll be a series of videos. This is the first of a series. It was requested by people who are already very familiar with this work, with the website, with the podcast I'm about to describe, and so on. But they wanted to get really that overview that they haven't heard yet. They've heard little pieces here and there. They certainly are familiar with the work itself. But what they were asking for is the big picture in that it really included my own history. How did I grow up into this particular path? And then how did my own career track inform this path? And how did it end up that I ended up with a business with that kind of odd elevator pitch that I just said, which I'll repeat. The purpose of this work is to provide transformative support and resources to people bravely facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. So it has been a very unique life that's added up to providing this kind of service to this audience, if you will. Um, but let me get back to just telling you a little bit more about what are the pieces that we've got in place that makes up that support and resources, and then we'll get to the historical context and so on. So I've been running a podcast for about 6 years now called The Poetry of Predicament. It's a YouTube channel, The Poetry of Predicament. And the purpose of the Poetry of Predicament has been to speak with people who are either prominent thought leaders in some aspect of transformative work in some field or another, or people who are themselves climate scientists or other scientists or experts in one of the fields that would be considered to be impacted directly by the human impact of our business as usual culture. Um, and so it's ranged from those climate scientists, sociologists, transformation-based coaches, and also it has involved a number of people who are not so well known, people who themselves have really come up with on their own an experience of a replicable, uh, transformative way of being in their own family life, in their own neighborhood, in their own organizations, or on their own work or creativity. And they have been very unusual, and it's been a broad range of people who qualify at that level to be in these conversations. And I have found virtually every one of them to be inspiring in their own way. What they are doing in their own unique way is doing their best to address the kind of open phrase that a guy named Charles Eisenstein has been making popular for a few years now, of coming forth with it, bringing forth a more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. Getting a little ahead of myself, and I'm going to be getting back to the list of things that we offer here. But to be more specific there, um, it's been very clear to me since, well, the moment that I really crossed the threshold into this, committing my life to the service of this community and to life itself on the planet. It was clear to me that if we just, in some sort of wishful thinking, kept kept repeating the phrase, "The more beautiful world our hearts know is possible," in the face of the extraordinarily quickly deteriorating world that we're living in right now, in terms of both human systems and Earth systems, that sort of wishful thinking and sort of flowery statements that we can just sort of paste across the sunset sky and be inspired by. What I've seen is that even though I've been in the transformation-based training world and for quite some time, and have been involved with regular linear corporate training as well extensively, what I can say is that the ways that we've attempted to change things up till now, the usual modalities from the very individual level all the way out to the nation, states, and global level, they're just clearly not going to work. They haven't been working. In fact, in the face of um, 40 years of knowing that we have existential level damage going on as we continue and to grow our business as usual global model, it's been very, very clear that whatever we think we are going to be effective in now, will be no more effective today than it has been in the past 40 years. ironically, we've not only not been effective, we've been increasing and accelerating and intensifying our negative impact on the planet for more than 40 years. So that's, again, another whole topic. So we've talked just very briefly about the podcast, the Poetry of Predicament. We've talked about, I mentioned, but let me be more specific about the website and all the web resources that we've got in the livingresilience.net website, and particularly in the Deep Academy, which is what we call our programs page there on the website. And in that programs area, we offer everything from the very beginning level, like introductory level support and resources for folks who are just learning what is this collapse aware situation. You know, all I've got is just this gut feeling that things aren't going very well. So we've got that entry level, I think, pretty well covered in terms of very basic, what's sometimes called first aid level resilience skills. Then we've also offered a number of different ever growing levels of hopefully of value in terms of deeper resilience skills that take some practice, that take some depth of engagement in a person's life, in a family's life, in a neighborhood or an organization's life, to be able to activate them, to embody them. So it's a kind of a graduated scale that we're offering in terms of those support and resources. Because that's the only thing I've been able to figure in terms of what can we offer that will make any kind of a difference in this world that appears to be deteriorating at an ever more rapid rate. Again, we'll get to that stuff later. So the livingresilience.net website, the the Deep Academy programs page and all that's on offer there, the Poetry of Predicament podcast. We also have a number of support group offerings online, and eventually someday they'll be in person as well. But the kind of the cornerstone that's been lasting, you know, these past 7 years or so is one called Safe Circle. And all the links to all the access to all of these references will be available in the show notes. So I hope you'll take advantage of these, and hope to meet you soon in one of those support groups or one of those online learning series and so on. What I'd like to do now is just give you one brief video clip that I think is representative. I think it's rather gentle at this point. Used to be that it was pretty bold. It was pretty shocking to hear Greta Thunberg. At that time, I think she was still 15. 15-year-old Swedish girl who had really just taken on with all of her being to make a difference, to get some attention, and to create change, real change, in a world that she was seeing being destroyed by the adults around her, and her accusation, and rightly so, that all of the adults really around the world were doing nothing about these life critical, these existential level challenges and predicaments that we have been creating, especially in the past 100 years, and with a special intensity in the past 50 years. So I'm going to play this clip of Greta Thunberg, and see, you have to have seen It's very unlikely that you're watching this video and you haven't seen Greta Thunberg speak, especially in this one of the earliest speeches from her. So let's take a moment to recall her presence and particularly what she was asking for, what she was demanding. And we can then start to look at what is it, what are some of the questions that we can start to ask ourselves about what it is that she's seeing, what it is that's motivating her into an extraordinary level of fine focus and also action. Whereas the vast majority of adults on the planet are nowhere near that level of presence and action. So Greta Thunberg.
Our house is on fire. I am here to say our house is on fire. According to the IPCC, we are less than 12 years away from not being able to undo our mistakes. In that time, unprecedented changes in all aspects of society needs to have taken place, including a reduction of our CO2 emissions by at least 50%. And please note that those numbers do not include the aspect of equity, which is absolutely necessary to make the Paris Agreement work on a global scale. Nor does it include tipping points or feedback loops, like the extreme powerful methane gas being released from the thawing Arctic permafrost. At places like Davos, people like to tell success stories, but their financial success has come with an unthinkable price tag. And on climate change, we have to acknowledge that we have failed. All political movements in their present form have done so. And the media has failed to create broad public awareness. But Homo sapiens have not yet failed. Yes, we are failing, but there is still time to turn everything around. We can still fix this. We still have everything in our own hands. But unless we recognize the overall failures of our current systems, we most probably don't stand a chance. We are facing a disaster of unspoken sufferings for enormous amounts of people. And now is not the time for speaking politely or focusing on what we can or cannot say. Now is the time to speak clearly. Solving the climate crisis is the greatest and most complex challenge that Homo sapiens have ever faced. The main solution, however, is so simple that even a small child can understand it. We have to stop the emissions of greenhouse gases. And either we do that or we don't. You say nothing in life is black or white, but that is a lie, a very dangerous lie. Either we prevent a 1.5 degree of warming or we don't. Either we avoid setting off that irreversible chain reaction beyond human control or we don't. Either we choose to go on as a civilization or we don't. That is as black or white as it gets. There are no grey areas when it comes to survival. Some say that we should not engage in activism. Instead, we should leave everything to our politicians and just vote for change instead. But what do we do when there is no political will? What do we do when the politics needed are nowhere in sight? Here in Davos, just like everywhere else, everyone is talking about money. It seems that money and growth are our only main concerns. And since the climate crisis is a crisis that has never once been treated as a crisis, people are simply not aware of the full consequences of our everyday life. People are not aware that there is such a thing as a carbon budget, and just how incredibly small that remaining carbon budget is. And that needs to change today. No other current challenge can match the importance of establishing a wide public awareness and understanding of our rapidly disappearing carbon budget that should and must become our new global currency and the very heart of future and present economics. We are now at a time in history where everyone with any insight of the climate crisis that threatens our civilization and the entire biosphere must speak out in clear language, no matter how uncomfortable and unprofitable that may be. We must change almost everything in our current societies. The bigger your carbon footprint is, the bigger your moral duty. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as if you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house was on fire, because it is.
So again, at this point, all the novelty has worn off. She is well known. She's given even more fiery speeches, as we all know. But now is the time to start to look at what has had us ignore her messages and then ignore the scientists' messages that have accompanied those 40 years of our knowledge of things are not going well. And if they keep going this way, then we are likely to be encountering existential level breakdown, collapse of Earth and human systems, and all of it human caused. So what are some of the questions that we can ask ourselves and engage with so that we can start to see how we personally have been impacted and how we personally have been complicit at our tiny little individual level? And perhaps most importantly, eventually, we can start to see how transformation, the transformative methodologies that I was hinting at before, might be our only opportunity to create some kind of opening, some kind of new possibilities, new ways of relating with one another and with the earth itself that we heretofore have not seen. That is only going to come out of engaging with the truly transformative within ourselves. That isn't going to come by just the power of positive thinking or the right 7 steps to success in terms of saving the planet or saving humanity. This is an extraordinary journey that we're all on, whether we want to be or not. Whether you agree with my timing as I'm seeing it, or Greta Thunberg's timing as she sees it, or anyone else in that continuum of the collapse-aware community that ranges from just having a gut feeling that something's not right, and maybe it would be a good thing to get going on some positive change, vote for the right things, and maybe by 2100 we'll have things sorted out. That could be the kind of less engaged, less urgent end of the spectrum of the collapse aware consciousness or community. And that, of course, goes up through what could be called at the extreme level, the near-term human extinction end of the spectrum, in which people are crystal clear that we're in collapse now. We've been collapsing for some time, and that there is a cascade, now a very real cascade of human and earth systems that have been pushed into a series of tipping points, interconnected tipping points that now indicate that perhaps it's too late. You will likely find yourself somewhere in the middle of that continuum. For now, let's kind of pause back from looking at, what is the timeline that I'm using to estimate out into a future, and do I agree with Dean Walker, or do I agree with Greta Thunberg and her timing and her urgency and so on. I'd like to take you back to really early on. Here's me fulfilling my request from the members of our community of practice, our ongoing study group and support group within the Living Resilience Deep Academy. And they were asking for some historical context. Does this transformation stuff come from? And where did my own psycho-spiritual practices, which I share quite a bit in the community of practice, where did they come from? And how have they turned out to be useful in the creation of this body of work, and in being in service to both humanity and the web of life in this body of work? So I'd like to just give you another clip from one of my heroes. There were two people that I dedicated my 2017 book called The Impossible Conversation, Choosing Reconnection and Resilience at the End of Business as Usual. The Impossible Conversation. And that was really quite a seminal moment for me of deciding to write that book. And why I decided to write that book is I saw that we were in the face of a number of human-caused predicaments. And what I'd like to share with you now is how those predicaments that I want to say close to 10 years ago, where that process started that ended up with the book and this body of work. I'd like to just share with you a little bit of historical context of where my first inklings of this kind of human-caused damage to the planet and these kind of human-caused predicaments, existential predicaments, would be coming on. And it was back when I was about 10 years old. And there was a gentleman named Jacques Cousteau, who was on every few months or so, they would have a special, which would be the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. And I was shown a world that I never could have imagined. The beauty, extraordinary brilliance of he and his crew, and just the unspeakable beauty of the undersea world. He also would, in each of his shows, he would finish up with some kind of a comment about the area where they had been focusing. And he would say, look here in this aspect of this area and see the human-caused damage that's going on and been going on. And if this continues, this area will die. The animals, the coral reefs, and so on, they will die. And what I noticed in myself was I would be in tears when he would share at that point in the show, each of the episodes. And I also noticed that I was the only one in tears. So we'll get to that. Let me just play a little bit of a reminder of, a bit of a trailer about Jacques Cousteau, a couple of scenes, and then we'll get going on that track.
People protect what they love. All of you who love the sea, help us protect her.
Jacques Cousteau. Extraordinary, just extraordinary. I should make a brief mention. There was another person that I mentioned that I dedicated my book, The Impossible Conversation, to. And that was another environmentally focused hero of mine and so many other people since that time, a woman named Rachel Carson. And if you haven't heard of Rachel Carson and you don't know about her extraordinarily courageous work of facing off with corporate and government agencies to basically face down most remarkably, most noteworthy in her series of facing off with these forces was her fight against DDT, one of the most pungent and toxic pesticides that that humanity's ever come up with. Her awareness of the systemic effects of that kind of toxicity, she was just prescient. She was a pioneer. And then her courage to be able to bring that into the face of the corporations that were selling that and still sell that type of toxic substance today at a scale that's unimaginable now. But she had some very successful chapters in her career, in her time of doing that kind of facing off with corporate and government agencies. To get back to Jacques Cousteau and his impact on me, again, I could see, and I didn't say this before, but really important to say, I was only 9 or 10 years old. I could see that what he was saying was something that no one else around me, no adults around me were saying. My tears were very real, and all the other children around me and all the other adults around me, nobody else was in tears. And, I was just a kid, but it was pretty obvious that nothing about what Jacques Cousteau was pointing out, nothing was going to change. The systems that we had in place would just continue. I had no idea what that exactly meant, but it clearly, by Jacques Cousteau's words, it clearly was going to end up in the collapse, the eventual collapse of certainly the Earth systems. And I could see, again, just a kid, but I could see that that would have to eventually affect the human systems as well. So to wrap up this historical timeline, this historical context of just my childhood and that kind of where it all got started, I'd like to move forward a number of years through college, in which I stayed quite environmentally active and aware. And I started to study psychology and came out of psychology and into quite a remarkable career in, again, this transformation-based training, which started out with individuals and couples and so on, but also then went into our organizational or corporate versions of transformation-based training for increased corporate effectiveness. And it all boiled down to it had an effect on the bottom line, and that it was transformation based. They were happy about that because it tended to produce a positive, unpredictable, nonlinear jump in their effectiveness, which meant not only their way of relating with one another was often very positively impacted. So the atmosphere within the organization, within the corporation, could be said to be greatly improved. But of course, behind it all, it affected their bottom line. One of the largest programs that that I was involved with was the breakup of years and years ago. We had one phone company in the USA, and that was for the entire early part of the 20th century, and that was AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph. AT&T was then broken up into what could then be called the Baby Bells. And I was a part of a large team that worked with tens of thousands of people at all levels of management and executive level and so on, in which they uh, consciously as they knew how, created a transition from this monolith, this single company. There was an unofficial motto of AT&T, which is, "We don't care, we don't have to." They were the phone company, and there was nobody else to call. There was no competition. Quite an extraordinary time. So the idea was to transition as many people as possible into the new formulation of a number of Baby Bells, and basically designing in uh, a natural amount of competition between those Baby Bells, and then obviously other competitors would have room to be able to come in as well. Yeah, I think you can gather where it's gone. AT&T is still there, but it is nowhere near the monopoly. And we have other monopolies, but that's an entirely different conversation. To give you a little bit of a personal track through those corporate times, through the 80s, 90s, the aughts, if you will, 2000s. That was more or less the trajectory of my career time. And I, of course, knew that here I was on the corporate track. I had a remarkable job, and I'm thrilled that I had that opportunity, and I'm deeply grateful. But I also knew the entire time that I was being a part of the corporate machine around the world, the business as usual industrial complex. I was a cog in that, and getting my kind of piece of the pie, if you will. And I was able to go back to, had grown up in San Diego. I would go back to San Diego on an annual basis, and I would go back to my dive spots that I had been very familiar with. And every year I would see more and more devastation of every one of those dive spots. And I knew that what I was doing, what we were all doing in this wonderful transformation-based training world, was we were intensifying and accelerating the human impact on Earth. One part of that impact has come to be called climate change. Then go backwards in time for just a moment to plant a seed that will then make far more sense as we move into how it's showing, how this all showed up in terms of creating this body of work, this living resilience and this safe circle and poetry and predicament and so on. And that is back in those early days of my early teens. I was exposed to a number of extraordinary experiences and lineages, if you will, in the psychospiritual domain. I had some mentors and some early teaching and exposure to extraordinary experiences that ranged from the shamanic and plant medicine variety to the just a long-term exposure to remarkable areas of the natural world around San Diego where I was living, which ranged from a place called Torrey Pines in San Diego was one of my core places that I would go to be with not only the ocean, which was so vitally important to recharge my own batteries, but also there in that it's a mystical environment. It's a magical place. And that was also a place where I would was exposed to and maintained a practice of consciously engaging with plant medicines for a number of decades eventually, but starting out at that time. And there were a number of other kind of psycho-spiritual threads, practices that I was able to start then, very young in my mid-teens, and carry with me through that whole corporate time, through that whole flying around to Asia and to Europe and here in the States, and being involved with other dynamic transformation-based trainers and really willing organizations, and then individuals in the personal development work. It was again a magical time, and little did I know that yes, I'd be bringing along a few elements from the corporate side of that transformation-based work. And there's still a few elements that are salvageable out of that. What I can tell you though, that is over the decades, it became more and more of a life hack situation. The same kind of stuff that we now are pumped with 24/7 on the internet of, this is going to be, the 12 steps that all successful people do before 8 a.m. and these 3 life hacks are going to transform your life and so on. The corporate version of transformation-based work really quickly deteriorated into what is now, what has been for decades, the world of life coaching, executive coaching, performance coaching, unlimited success coaching, and so on. And truthfully, all of that has really collapsed, in my view, into a heap of self-importance, and really is just now starting to grapple with the fact that all it really ever was the leading edge of how to benefit most greatly from the most extraordinarily powerful, accessible, and profitable fuel source humanity's ever seen, which of course is fossil fuels. So we're about to shift gears into this final chapter of this first introductory chapter of this, this series that's going to be coming on. This giving you more or less a historical context of this, how did this work come about? And what I'm kind of leading up to is what was a surprising punchline for me, especially as I was finishing up my book. The purpose of the book was to share this extraordinary experience that I had of vetting the information that was implied in what has been called abrupt climate change. So to have not only a collapse-aware orientation in the world, but to see it as coming faster and more intensely than we hear about, certainly in mainstream media and in usual conversations. And in the writing of that book, it was clear to me that most people will not do what I did, which is to be exposed to that information. And I really had to just immediately vet the material. I had to do some research to find out, is this either the wackiest bullshit to come down the pike, or is this the transformation of humanity, whether we're ready for it or not? And that latter is where I landed, that we are faced with our own transformation, whether we're ready for it or not. This notion of being faced with transformation that we're not consciously inviting, that we're not consciously grooming ourselves for, or preparing our capacities for, is problematic, to be diplomatic in how I'm saying it. Basically, what I'm seeing is that we are reluctant as a global culture. We're reluctant to take the slightest look at change at the smallest level, to the Greta Thunberg, 40 years, naming it, 40 years of not only not doing anything, but accelerating and intensifying our impact. That's an unfortunate place of rigidity in our global culture, and especially in the global north, and then the more privileged pockets of the global north, the USA being probably the king of the hill in terms of that. Clearly, where we find ourselves now is actually even, it's surprising the heck out of me. It has so intensified just since my release of my book in 2017. In these 4 to 5 years, we have gone from what was already pungent enough to be called the impossible conversation. Would we consciously be able to, at the national level or global level, would we be able to consciously choose to stop, to diminish our consumption of fossil fuels? And the only way to do that is to back our entire global culture, down from a system that is uh, founded in a perpetual growth model, founded on a lie of infinite growth on a finite planet. Clearly, we have no capacity collectively to face this conversation. That's why I named the book The Impossible Conversation. Now we find ourselves 4 to 5 years later from my determination, by naming it in that way that I did. Now we find ourselves in an even more brittle, an even more fragile, an even more toxic, and deeply separate from each other, from Earth, and so on, deeply divided and fragile formulation of a global culture. What I'm wanting to do in this series is suggest that there are some elements from that transformation-based work, and much to my surprise, number of elements from the psychospiritual practices and their transformative elements that I've brought forth into this work. What I'm not here to say is that I have any solutions whatsoever. I, in fact, was warned by my earliest teachers in those psychospiritual practices that there is no turning this around. This global human presence, it is going to self-terminate. It is going to take itself down, and with it, much of life on Earth. So that is where I've landed in terms of a conclusion about what it is to be collapse aware. But why I then committed myself to this kind of work, to this expression of this work, is that there is still life to be lived. There is still much beauty in this world. Again, unbearable beauty in this world to be experienced. And so that is the commitment of this work, is how to bring transformative support and resources to people bravely facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. That's what we're going to be exploring, not about creating solutions, but ironically, it is also not about making people wrong who are trying to find solutions. It's this extraordinary balance of diving deep into our experience of being profoundly present in the moment, even though we have a horrific future that appears to be on our horizon. These are extraordinary times. What I've committed myself to do, because truthfully, there's still that 9-year-old boy inside of me, always has been. And I had this way of repeating to myself as I'd be getting myself ready to go out on a scuba dive in the ocean of San Diego, is that it doesn't have to be this way. And no matter which of the practices, the psycho-spiritual practices, I could be a time in the desert or in the extraordinary back mountains of Baja. It could be again as just another wonderful, miraculous time in the ocean. I could find myself saying it doesn't have to be this way. And there was always a profound experience if I could get myself into the moment, present in the moment, that is ineffable. It is that which I believe has been the same territory that's described by the sages in the wisdom traditions, in virtually all of the major religions, spiritual traditions. This is the territory of those people, those adepts who committed their entire lives to seeking out that level of presence in the moment, that level of preciousness, that level of being able to distill out the level of the sacred in the midst of virtually any moment. Now, again, I'm not saying this as some solution that I now have as some sort of guru figure. What I'm pointing toward is that each person who has come on to join us in this support group called the Community of Practice, each person has really committed themselves to finding what matters most to them, then to be able to discern what are some of the ways that we can reconnect ourselves with the web of life. Because clearly what has gotten us into this predicament is our disconnection from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in the human experience. Pretty bold term. We're moving quickly. We won't cover that all now. We won't cover it at all, but it's previews of coming attractions. This series is going to give you a sense of element by element, how we can put flesh on the bones to that pretty bold assertion that what got us here is a individual and collective disconnection from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in a human life. And what we, in our support group that meets on a very regular basis, what we do is to support one another, each having different practices, support one another in that process of reconnection. For some of us, that means that we kind of build up skills and capacity to be able to be more of service to the people we love, to life itself. To some people, what they end up doing with that newfound capacity and presence is that they'll dive into a level of creativity that they couldn't have even dreamt of before. There are so many different expressions available to people who engage in this kind of reconnection. It is a privilege to be involved with this circle of folks. Again, each person having their own emphases in these practices of reconnection and how that then expresses itself out into the world. It's just a It's phenomenal. You know, for some of us, it means more engaged and passionate activism than they've ever known. For others who might have been activists their whole life, it can mean a fundamental shift to a very different expression that is more true for them now at their core than the other types of activism and expression that they've had for decades. So that's probably enough for this first round to just give you a sense of some of the elements that have come together to form the livingresilience.net and the Deep Academy programs and Safe Circle and other support groups, the community of practice, and the Poetry of Predicament podcast. There's, all that stuff. So I hope this has at least piqued your curiosity. It will get more fundamental from here, and it'll be more grounded in what are the actual practices and what are the topics that we find ourselves engaged with much of the time in that community of practice, to just see if you resonate with that, if that's something that you find valuable, if it's something that you have a sense of, yeah, I could see spending a bit more time integrating a real facility with being able to grieve. So for so many of us, we don't have that facility of grief. As a culture, we are downright crippled at it. That's one of those topics. So again, that's enough for now. Thank you so much for joining me in this kind of overview, and look forward to producing these next few elements for you to see. And if you find yourself more than just your interest piqued, but if you're inspired to come and check out some of these offerings, it'll be great to meet you and have you join us in one or more of these support groups and so on. Whatever it is that you choose out of your engagement, your leaning into this daunting present and even more daunting future in the collapse aware community, if you will. Really wish you well. There are no answers in any direction, but there are pockets of support. There are pockets of places where we can expand our capacity to be present together in the face of this daunting future. So I look forward to possibly meeting you soon, and all the best.